Macron said these talks would be demanding. He's fresh off a week where he's on an international stage for the first time, NATO, G7, and many people giving him an A+ grade. Will he be able to follow that up with Vladimir Putin?
He just could. Vladimir Putin is a formidable leader to meet, but the cards are in Macron's favor. Bear in mind, this is an unexpected visit. The two leaders weren't expected to meet until the G20 summit in Germany in July. But Macron just seized the initiative when Putin called Macron to congratulate him over his May 7th election victory. And this seems like a very magnanimous gesture on Macron's part, especially after the vitriol of the campaign where there were allegations of Russian hacking and a vicious smear campaign against Macron, because Putin, of course, backed the losing candidate. Bear in mind, Putin is a rare guest in the EU these days after the 2014 seizure of Ukraine. He may be the leader of a former superpower, a nuclear-armed nation, but Russia is under economic sanctions. The economy is heavily dependent on oil and natural gas, and he faces considerable pressure of human rights violations in Syria and Ukraine. Now, this meeting, what's going to be interesting is watching the optics of this meeting. This is being held in the sumptuous Versailles Palace. It's commemorating Peter the Great's 1717 visit to France. So history is going to really bear upon this. Putin, has long sought to overlook the Soviet years, and he harks back on Russia's glorious cultural Christian past. But here in the Versailles Palace, when it comes to glorious history, Macron is winning that round, because Peter the Great, who was a forerunner of the Enlightenment, was actually desperate to come to France. And when he was finally invited to Versailles, he was floored by the majesty of Versailles, and he replicated its architectural style and his his palace in St. Petersburg. So Macron is possibly winning in this round too. And lastly, when it comes to personal style, Putin, as I said, can be very intimidating when you meet him on a face-to-face. But as you noted, Macron comes straight from meeting with another bully, and the handshake, which has now gone viral on social media, has shown that Macron knows this game. He may not be as macho as Putin, but he's smooth. And he's proved that he's smart. So, in terms of the optics, the cards are very much in Macron's favor.
Emmanuel Macron getting a home court advantage thanks to Versailles. Probably some more handshake diplomacy we might see also. Now, there are two big issues that they differ on, Ukraine and Syria. Any chance there might be some agreement or something to develop between these two leaders?
Look, nobody's really expecting a sea change. It's not going to be a reset at stake. This is really a first meeting, a face-to-face, where they get a sense of each other. On Syria, Macron supports the war against the Islamic State group in Raqqa. So there's common ground there. What he has done, which is very different from François Hollande on the campaign trail, is that he has called for a dialogue to end the political crisis in Syria. He has not made the departure of Assad a precondition, unlike Hollande. So there is room for some, there's wriggle room over here. On Ukraine, they have a framework. It's called the Minsk Agreement. It was actually, the framework was set in Normandy when Putin was here to commemorate the D-Day celebrations. The Minsk Agreement has failed, but they can restart it. There is a window for that. But Macron has supported keeping the sanctions on Russia. And he's going to be quite tough with Putin because he has not forgotten the game that Moscow has played on the campaign trail. So in a sense, Putin, by backing the loser in the French presidential candidate, is going to probably find that, he's paying now for his past mistakes.
All right. We'll be watching that meeting closely. We shall be sure to check in with you as it happens later on today. Lila Jacinto, our international affairs editor. Now, the German chancellor said Europe can no longer completely count on its allies. Angela Merkel made the remarks while at a campaign event in a Bavarian bear tent in Munich. She did not mention the U.S. president directly. Her comments followed last week's NATO and G7 summits, both of which were Donald Trump's first since taking the White House. While Trump ran a campaign of America First policy, Merkel said Europe must take its fate in its own hands.
The times in which we can fully count on others are to some extent over, as I have experienced in the past few days. That is why I can only say we Europeans must really take our destiny into our own hands.
And the Donald Trump administration is considering reinforcements as it's under scrutiny for its links to Russia. This is reports that Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, also his senior advisor, has become the focus of investigations between Trump campaign officials and Russia. The president is reportedly frustrated by his team's inability to get a handle on the crisis and may expand his team of lawyers as well as bring back top campaign strategists to help with PR. Meanwhile, 3 weeks after being sacked by Trump, former FBI Director James Comey is expected to testify before the Senate over Russian interference in last year's presidential campaign. Our White House correspondent Philip Crowther has more.
The U.S. president returned to Washington this weekend from his first trip abroad, and he returned to a pretty familiar chorus. Further revelations of contacts between his transition team and his campaign team and Russian intelligence officials and members of the Russian government. At the center of it this time around is Jared Kushner. He is the son-in-law of Donald Trump and one of his closest advisors, indeed somebody who has a lot of access to the Oval Office. The reports over this weekend were about Jared Kushner trying to establish secret communications between the transition team and the Russian government. Now, we know that Jared Kushner had plenty of meetings with Russian officials. That was his right to do so while he was a member of the transition. But of course, this is an administration that is particularly secretive about anything to do with Russia. In fact, the administration of Donald Trump sent out the Secretary of Homeland Security, John Kelly, to defend that establishment or that attempt to establish a back channel of communications with the Russians. Now, this happens as Donald Trump again also establishes his very own chorus, also a familiar one. He again attacked what he calls the fake news media on Twitter. Indeed, he says that a lot of the reporting is based on completely untrue sources that, of course, we know not to be true.
Philip Crowther reporting from Washington. Now, in clear defiance of international warnings, North Korea has launched a short-range ballistic missile. Its third test in as many weeks and the 9th of the year. This latest launch coming off the East Coast. The missile traveled approximately 450 kilometers before crashing into the Sea of Japan. Tension has been high as Pyongyang seeks to develop its nuclear weapons that can reach U.S. military bases in the region. Japan said the launch violates a UN resolution and is seeking concrete action with the United States, while South Korea says it will hold a National Security Council meeting. Our Seoul correspondent Andrew Salmon has more.
This is no surprise to anyone who watches North Korea. People say it's an unpredictable regime. In many ways, it's extraordinarily predictable. The North Koreans have said they'll be carrying out these ballistic missile tests on a weekly basis. That's exactly what they've been doing for the last 3 weeks. What's a little bit worrisome about the last 3 tests is they all seem to have been quite successful. Now, this indicates that the U.S. sort of so-called left of launch operations, the cyber warfare and the electronic warfare designed to suppress these missile programs are no longer working or are no longer working very well. This also suggests that North Koreans are moving towards their goal of an ICBM, an intercontinental ballistic missile. What they need right now is they have the ability to put this thing up into the atmosphere. They need to be able to test to bring it down again. They need a re-entry vehicle. They need targeting devices. Once they have them, then basically they'll have a working ICBM.
Let's take a quick look at some of the day's other top stories. And in the UK, 3 more people have been arrested in connection to the Manchester terror attack, bringing the total to 14. It's nearly a week after a suicide bomber killed 22 people at a concert. One of those was Martin Head. Dozens of friends and family members holding a vigil for the 29-year-old. Landslides and floods have killed more than 150 people in Sri Lanka, a figure that could rise as more than 100 are missing. The country has been battered by the worst rains it's seen since 2003. Some 2,000 military personnel have been deployed to the worst affected areas. And Venezuela's opposition has pledged to step up protests later today. They accuse President Nicolas Maduro of mishandling the economic crisis, making power grabs, and cracking down on dissent. On Sunday, a 20-year-old protester was killed after being shot in the abdomen, bringing the total dead to 60 after 2 months of anti-government protests. On Rio de Janeiro's famous Copacabana beach, thousands of people attended a concert called Direct Elections Now. This after pressure continues to pile up on the country's deeply unpopular president, Michel Temer. The High Court is investigating Temer for alleged obstruction of justice and corruption. Temer denies wrongdoing. Sinam Chantier reports.
Songs of protest from Caetano Veloso to Milton Nascimento. The Brazilian music icons perform for thousands of people gathered on Copacabana Beach, calling for the president to stand down. Protesters consider Michel Temer's presidency illegitimate. Chanting Temer out, they want new direct presidential elections. Wagner Moura, star of the Netflix series Narcos, also lent his voice.
Though a president elected by the Congress is in the Constitution, so it's legal, but it's not moral. Morally, we have to elect our next president.
He's accused of obstruction of justice and corruption. Michel Temer has faced mounting pressure to step down since the disclosure of a recording by O Globo newspaper earlier this month that appeared to show the 76-year-old condoning the payment of hush money to a jailed lawmaker. The embattled leader, however, has rejected calls for his resignation in a defiant statement.
My friends, our work has continued and will continue. We still have much to do. And this is the only path my government intends to follow, to put Brazil back on track. So let's get to work.
The scandal comes just